Despite the continued resistance on Okinawa, it is becoming clear that the last of the Japanese garrison there will eventually succumb, and the island will fall into the hands of the Americans. It is with this thought in mind that the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff begin plotting what will surely be the final and perhaps the most costly operation of the war, the invasion of Japan. It is with a mixture of impatience and reluctance that the Americans begin planning this final battle. With the war in Europe over, there is a strong desire shared by both the military and the general populace that the war in the Pacific be brought to an end as quickly as possible. Just the same, U.S. commanders are all too aware that this finale will be neither quick nor easy. Besides the 3 million regular Army troops stationed in Japan, all men ages 15 to 60 and all women ages 17 to 45 have been conscripted into a civilian militia numbering some 32 million. The battle for the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and now Okinawa have clearly demonstrated that the closer the Americans get to Japan itself, the more determined and fanatical is the resistance. The U.S. commanders are certain the Japanese stand ready, as would the citizens of any nation, to defend their homeland with their lives if necessary. At this stage of the war, there is little doubt about the outcome. The United States will most certainly defeat Japan. Yet the Joint Chiefs are none too anxious to cast the final die. While doing so is certain to bring this long and bloody conflict to an end, it will just as certainly cost at least 1 million American men their lives. Yet there are those among the U.S. military leaders who are not so sure that the Japanese aren't already beaten. General Douglas MacArthur, who has led the fight in the Pacific from the outset, and who clearly has a much greater understanding of this enemy than any other high-level military official, is among those who believe that an invasion of Japan may be unnecessary. While he is certain that the Japanese warlords will never counsel any strategy but battle to the death, he cautions those in the Pentagon to be alert for signs of conciliation from Japanese statesmen in Tokyo. MacArthur knows that for all intents and purposes, the Japanese are beaten. Their navy has been destroyed, their merchant fleet decimated, their industrial base laid to ruin by constant attack from the air. He and his staff are so certain that Japan is on the brink of collapse that they begin to draw up plans for a peaceful occupation of the country. MacArthur's assessment is right. Despite newspaper headlines and official reports that the war is being won, the Japanese people, starving and struggling to survive without the basic necessities, watching as American bombers fly overhead unmolested and reduce their homes and businesses to rubble, seeing their neighbors dying or fleeing to the countryside, are beginning to question whether or not they are being told the truth. And it is not just the people who are having doubts. The Japanese ambassador to the Soviet Union has been making frantic appeals to the Soviet foreign minister, asking that Russia act as a neutral party in developing an armistice with the United States. Those at high levels of government are beginning to suspect that the emperor himself is coming close to admitting defeat. Still, the Americans must assume the worst. All indications have been that the Japanese will fight to the last man and woman, and so they must assume that invasion and conquest are the only way to end the war. And so the planning begins. Okinawa, the last strategic stepping stone necessary for the landing of troops on the shores of the Japanese home islands, will be the jumping-off point for some 750,000 American soldiers, who will embark on an amphibious assault of the southernmost island of Kyushu. Known as Operation Olympic, the attack, which is scheduled for 1st November, will secure strategic airfields and allow troops there to cover the subsequent invasion of the main island of Honshu, scheduled to take place in March of 1946. As they make these plans, as they prepare to send 1 million young men to certain death, there is an abiding hope in the hearts of these generals that they will find a way to avoid a direct assault on the shores of Japan, that Providence will provide them the means once and for all to bring this damnable war to an end, without shedding another drop of American blood. After victory in Europe was declared on 7 May, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was given a rousing ovation in the House of Commons. It is not too far a stretch to say that he is the man responsible for wresting Britain from the clutches of Hitler, ensuring its survival and eventual role in liberating Europe. "This is your victory," he proclaimed in modest fashion. Perhaps Churchill learned the value of modesty in the ebb and flow of his own political fortunes. In the late 20s and early 30s, Churchill was a politician down on his luck. He had served poorly as Lord of the Exchequer in the Baldwin administration. Party switches and unpopular stands on issues from Indian self-rule to Edward VIII's abdication alienated him from the leadership of the ruling Conservatives. It was an unfortunate time indeed to become persona non grata in the arena of public affairs, because he was one of the few who recognized the threat posed by a new political star on the rise in Germany, Adolf Hitler. The Germans, seething from humiliations heaped upon them as a result of World War I, were hungry for revenge and arming themselves to the teeth. As England's nervous leaders dabbled in talk of disarmament, Churchill railed against such tomfoolery from the sidelines. He was all but ignored until Hitler moved into the Rhineland in 1936, a clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles. After Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's shilly-shallying efforts at appeasement failed, there was clearly only one man for the job, the cigar-chomping seer of European politics, Winston Churchill. Vowing to achieve victory at all costs, he appointed himself Minister of Defense and energized the war machine at his command. Firing off directives to his staff and preparing for the fight of his life, the Prime Minister took to the field like a booming howitzer compared to Chamberlain's fizzling firecracker. When France fell like a bad souffle and England found itself standing alone on the brink of a German invasion, it was the pugnaciously determined Churchill who squashed talk of a negotiated peace and inspired his countrymen to defy the mighty German Empire. Impudently flashing his signature V for Victory salute, Churchill's brash confidence also inspired America's Lend-Lease program to supply the Allied cause, even before it officially entered the conflict. Churchill was the quintessential wartime leader. Rather than spending all his time in smoke-filled rooms with the policymakers, he believed in being seen. He visited coastal defenses and air bases, inspected the troops at home and in the field, and observed the bombed-out streets of London firsthand. Dispensing his inimitable brand of sympathy and swagger, Churchill became hugely popular with the British people, who dubbed him grandly "Good old Winnie." The English bulldog was hardly infallible, of course. Blotting out the negative side of the ledger is his failed Norwegian campaign and firing on the French fleet in Morocco. Even Churchill's less impressive stratagems, however, did little to tarnish his martial gleam. When Hitler ordered the first airstrikes on London and the blitz began in earnest, British subjects rallied around the blazing oratory of their dynamic leader.
"We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender."
Declaring the deadly and terrifying moment of Germany's relentless bombing England's finest hour, Churchill's defiance brought the nation through the initial crisis of threatened invasion and turned Hitler's attention to Russia. Eagerly beating the bushes for allies against the Axis, Churchill swallowed his distaste for communism and agreed to aid Josef Stalin when Germany invaded in June 1941. He continued to woo his most cherished would-be ally, President Franklin Roosevelt, until Japan played the role of matchmaker by attacking Pearl Harbor. Now that he had the powerful ally that he needed, Churchill began enthusiastically hatching plans to win the war. He believed that the key to beating Germany was by opening fronts on the periphery of the theater, thus stretching the enemy's resources and weakening the center for a knockout blow. North Africa, the Middle East, and Italy all figured in Churchill's strategy and, coincidentally, were all prime areas of British political and economic interest. Stalin's armies had borne the brunt of the war for months, and the Premier pressed for direct relief via an invasion of France. The American generals concurred with this bold thinking, but Churchill argued that Hitler was still too strong to chance a cross-channel assault. Using all his considerable powers of persuasion, the wily Prime Minister flew to Washington, securing Roosevelt's agreement to a campaign in North Africa instead. At the 1943 meeting with Roosevelt in Casablanca, it was play it again, Sam, as Churchill took advantage of Stalin's absence to offer yet another alternative to an attack on French beaches, this time an Allied invasion of Italy. But by the time the three supreme commanders met in Tehran in late 1943, Churchill found that some were becoming more supreme than others. His alternatives to an invasion of Normandy were turned aside, as Roosevelt did a little courting of his own, trying to get Comrade Stalin's promise to enter the war against Japan. Long suspicious of Stalin's designs on Eastern Europe, Churchill could only be a sour observer as the Soviets were allowed to keep both the Baltic states and eastern Poland. The long shadow of communism began to fall across the European landscape, but Churchill's political prescience continued to go unheeded. He was skeptical of the plans for Poland agreed upon by the Big Three at Yalta in February of 1945, but by this time he was clearly a junior partner. Still desperate for Soviet aid against Japan, Roosevelt dominated negotiations with Stalin, whose grasping went unchecked. With victory assured and all attention turned to the design of the post-war world, Churchill's greatest contributions to the Allied effort lay behind him. Should he ever disappear forever from the halls of power, his heroics in leading England to stand firm against Hitler and his guidance in helping the Western Allies to victory cement his place in history. An early, quiet exit is unlikely to occur, however. At the venerable age of 70, the bulldog still has plenty of bite left. 10 July 1945, the Pacific, the near demise of the once mighty Imperial Navy, allows the American fleet to sail closer to the Japanese home islands than ever before. The ghosts of the massive battleships Yamato and Amagi can do nothing to protect the increasingly vulnerable empire from strikes deep into the heart of Japan's war-making industry. Moving with impunity through the coastal waters off Honshu and Hokkaido, Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet prepares to hit, frequently and ferociously, at Japanese industry, shipping, and air bases. The first strike targets Tokyo. Surprisingly, American flyers encounter no aerial opposition and relatively light anti-aircraft fire. The seemingly empty airfields are deceptive, however. The Japanese have carefully dispersed and camouflaged their planes, conserving them for future massed kamikaze attacks. The Americans respond by bombing everything in sight, and with fragmentation devices, plenty that is out of sight. Bad weather delays further action for a few days, but on 14 July, massive air strikes continue on northern Honshu and neighboring Hokkaido Island. In over 1,000 sorties, Yank pilots sink 11 naval vessels, including the destroyer Tachibana and 20 merchant ships. More crippling still to the Japanese war effort, American bombs dispatched the coal-ferrying rail system between the two islands. As the carrier planes wreak havoc from above, a naval bombardment reaches the home islands for the first time in the war. 16-inch guns shell the ironworks at Kamaishi for 2 hours, setting the plant and the city aflame. On 15 July, Admiral Oscar Badger's task unit continues the barrage on Hokkaido's coast, this time targeting the Nihon Steel Company and the Wanishi Ironworks. This wide-scale destruction of Japan's iron and steel production, as well as the interruption of coal trade between two of the main islands, is disastrous for the Empire at this stage of the war. The effect on Japanese morale is a matter for speculation. Tightly controlled propaganda informs the citizens of glorious imperial victories and dismal Allied failures, even when the facts are clearly the opposite. Still believing in ultimate triumph, the people's resolve may only be strengthened by Allied bombing attacks. The truth, when it comes, may be the cruelest blow they suffer. Meanwhile, the relentless bombardment continues. Pilots will be able to hit objectives never before touched from the decks of carriers. And somewhere in the future lies the awe-inspiring prospect of landing an American invasion force on one of the home islands. For many Americans, news and pictures from the war have entered their lives at the local movie house. From steaming Pacific jungles to cold European steppes, newsreels have brought home the dramatic scenes of battle and the fighting spirit of the boys overseas. While military cameramen bravely recorded history in the hot zones, Hollywood has done its bit by producing thrilling features, attempting to capture the glory and grit of battle for a hungry public. More than 500 war movies have been made since 1942. Fueling the imagination as well as the patriotism of American citizens, these movies entertained while they shaped the war into familiar themes of duty, sacrifice, heroism, and the ultimate duel between good and evil. But movies are not only for the civilians. Anywhere a screen and a projector can travel, Hollywood comes to the soldiers in the field and on the sea. War-wise veterans find plenty to snicker at in glammed-up battle dramas, but comedy teams, musicals, and curvaceous starlets provide welcome escapes for relaxing soldiers and sailors. Some lucky GIs even get to see their favorite stars in person. Comedic favorite Joe E. Brown always gets a laugh in the camps with his infectious grin, while beautiful sirens like Marlene Dietrich and Ann Sheridan remind the boys what they're fighting for. No one is more welcomed than well-traveled funny man and tireless USO organizer Bob Hope, whose troupe of performers brings humor and humanity to far-flung outposts around the globe and injects a little levity into the grim heart of war. Whether it's the Andrews Sisters' snappy swing or Bing Crosby's signature crooning, songs of home are sure to evoke fond memories for lonely GIs. Perhaps no one needs more morale boosting than wounded GIs who are happy to get the occasional star-studded bedside visit along with their Purple Hearts. To their everlasting credit, celebrities have used their fame and their talent to communicate an important message from everyone at home, that the daily sacrifices of the fighting men are not forgotten. Hollywood screen stars have not limited their contributions to goodwill missions and entertainment, however. One of the first to enlist was matinee icon Jimmy Stewart, who served in the 8th Air Force. Colonel Stewart never had a bomb at the box office, but he has dropped more than a few flying missions over Germany. Screen idol Clark Gable, known to millions as the dashing Rhett Butler, enlisted after the tragic death of his movie star wife, Carol Lombard. At the age of 40, Gable insisted on being close to the action and was assigned to heavy bomber crews as a combat photographer. Being a famous American in the skies over Germany carries additional perks. Reichsmarschall Hermann Goering has offered a $5,000 bounty to the pilot who brings down the mustachioed actor, but frankly, Gable doesn't give a damn. With its inimitable mix of style and substance, grit and glitz, Hollywood has kept its pledge to support the war effort. The film community has played its part well, and for many thankful soldiers returning from abroad, future sacrifice and danger, intrigue and suspense will be experienced only in the cozy confines of their favorite movie house, not on the treacherous ground of a foreign field. July 1945, Alamogordo, New Mexico, while military leaders in Washington and the Pacific continue planning for the invasion of the Japanese home islands, on this seared, pitiless stretch of desert, a group of men are about to put to the test a device which may provide an alternative to what is sure to be the bloodiest battle of World War II. For years, American scientists, along with a group of physicists and experts who fled Nazi Germany before the war, have toiled ceaselessly to create a weapon of such destructive force that no enemy could withstand its power. The effort, known as the Manhattan Project, sought to harness the power of the atom for use in warfare. With the scientists being led by Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, the project was divided into 3 separate groups. One to produce a sustained nuclear reaction, one to produce fissionable material for use in the weapon, and one to design the actual workings of the bomb itself. The project has been enormously expensive, but it has also been enormously successful. The scientists and engineers working around the clock have succeeded in accomplishing all the tasks they were assigned. The atom bomb, the most powerful weapon ever created, is now a reality. By throwing a switch, man can now convert small amounts of matter into large amounts of energy. In theory. Before this weapon can be used against the enemy, it must be tested. While all of the equations on all of the blackboards at the Los Alamos laboratory indicate that it will work, it is all still so much conjecture, and no one can be absolutely certain that the atom bomb will not turn out to be the atom dud. And so Oppenheimer, military personnel and scientists, and a few trusted members of the press have gathered here in the New Mexico desert to witness what they hope will be the first atomic explosion in history. The group assembles at a command dugout 10 miles from Trinity, the name given to the actual test site. There, mounted on a 100-foot steel tower, hangs a mass of switches, wires, and explosive devices surrounding 5 kilograms of plutonium. This is Ground Zero. As the countdown approaches its end and the men huddle in bunkers or lie prone, waiting for the explosion, there is a sense that they are about to witness more than a weapons test. This bomb is the culmination not just of the Manhattan Project, but of hundreds of years of scientific and technological research. As human beings have endeavored to understand and control the world around them, each succeeding generation has taken the knowledge acquired by the previous generation and built on it. By standing on the shoulders of giants, these men have reached a point where they are directing the most basic elements of physical reality to do their bidding. They are about to witness not just an explosion, but the ultimate manipulation of nature. With these thoughts running through his mind, Oppenheimer waits for zero, and as it approaches, a passage from a sacred Hindu text fills his mind, leaving only itself and the vision before him. I am become death, the shatterer of worlds. July 17, 1945 occupied Germany. After utter defeat in its quest for European domination, the fatherland's future is now being decided by its enemies. Allied leaders meeting in Berlin in what is being called the Potsdam Conference are ironing out numerous points of contention between the Soviets and the Western Alliance. The only thing everyone seems capable of agreeing on is that the German people must acknowledge that they have suffered complete military defeat, and that never again will their armies be allowed to march across Europe. To that end, Germany will be divided into 4 zones of influence. Russia will control the east, Britain the northwest, France the southeast, and the United States the south. Germany's military capacity will be completely denuded. Beyond the mere disbandment of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, all clubs or organizations keeping alive German military tradition are outlawed. German industry, whose tanks, planes, and guns fueled the Blitzkrieg, is to be placed under Allied control. Industrial capacity not readily converted to civilian applications will be destroyed. To prevent future German aggression, the entire German educational system will be restructured, eliminating militaristic and Nazi doctrine. The judicial system is to be recast under the principles of democracy, giving equal protection under the law regardless of race, religion, or nationality. On 26 July, with the conference underway, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill returns to England for the general election. To the surprise of Churchill and the world, Churchill's Conservatives go down to defeat. The Socialists win by an amazing 2-1 landslide. The new Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, returns to Berlin to represent England. While President Truman is helping to sculpt post-war Germany, the war with Japan bears heavily on his mind. On 16 July, he receives word of the successful testing of an atomic bomb in Alamogordo, New Mexico. This bit of news relieves him of the pressure of getting a commitment out of Stalin to join the Pacific War. He is now certain that American troops landing on the shores of Japan will do so only when the surrender is complete, as an occupation force. Truman also believes this new bomb strengthens his position in trying to control Soviet aspirations. On 24 July, he offhandedly mentions to Stalin that the United States has a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin, whose spies already have reported to him about activities at Alamogordo, outwardly shows no special interest, saying only that he is glad and hopes the U.S. will make good use of the weapon against the Japanese. On 26 July, waiting to give the Japanese an opportunity to surrender, the United States, England, and China issue an ultimatum, calling for the immediate and unconditional surrender of all Japanese forces. The statement assures the Japanese their only alternative is complete and utter destruction. Japan's military leaders, as fanatically determined as ever, refuse the demand. As the conference draws to a close, Germany's fate is sealed. The entire social, political, and economic life of the country lies, at least for the near future, beyond the control of its citizens. While the new system is most certainly more conducive to a peaceful coexistence with the rest of Europe, there is a sense of foreboding in the mistrust and ill will between the Soviets and the West. Only history will tell if the remaking of Germany will lead to a viable, democratic nation-state, or if it will become the focus of contention between East and West, a fissure in the heart of Europe. July 1945, London. The changing of the guard has new meaning in Britain's capital. The first general election in 10 years has ousted the Conservative Party in favor of Labour, and most surprisingly, England has a new Prime Minister. Winston Churchill, national hero and inspirational war leader, has been turned out of office just weeks after victory in Europe was announced to rejoicing throngs in the city streets. After all the bell ringing and pub hopping was done, the nation's hangover began. With the crisis past, Britons began soberly mulling over what the post-war future might hold. Years of standing in ration lines and wading through the rubble left behind by German bombing has left the population war-weary and ready for change. They consider the party that started them on the path to war, rather than the man who brought them safely through it. Labour called for a new election in May after rejecting a proposal to continue the Churchill-led coalition government until the end of the Pacific War. Springing into action, Clement Attlee and Ernest Bevin campaigned throughout the country, delivering a message of economic empowerment and social security. They spoke of the Conservatives as the traditional party of wealth, class privilege, and anti-labor feeling. For their part, the Conservatives ran primarily on the laurels of their Prime Minister and derided Labour's socialist ideas and inexperience in government. Results from the 5 July balloting were delayed for 3 weeks while the votes of service people abroad were collected. Savvy political prognosticators in Britain predicted that Churchill's re-election was not a foregone conclusion, despite his popularity. One significant unknown in the mix was the large number of first-time voters who 10 years ago were more worried about puberty than public weal. The older electorate had lived through the results of the Great War: depression, unemployment, working-class poverty, and appeasement. Whatever the factors, Labour won its first overall majority in history on a platform of social reforms. More than the status quo, it seems, the public wants new and better housing, universal health care, jobs for returning soldiers, and a long-lasting peace. In the midst of the Potsdam Conference, Prime Minister-elect Attlee will travel to Germany with new Foreign Secretary Bevan to continue negotiations for peace. Without Churchill, how different the look is now at the bargaining tables of power. Who could have imagined that the future of the world would be shaped by a triumvirate of Harry Truman, Josef Stalin, and Clement Attlee? Throughout their island-hopping campaign, one of the greatest obstacles facing the Americans was turning the jungles and swamps of the South Pacific into airfields, roads, and naval bases. Completion of this daunting task was given to naval construction battalions, the Seabees. Beginning in 1941, engineers, construction workers, heavy equipment operators, and divers all were given extensive combat training and formed into battalions capable of building anything, anywhere, at any time. All the way across the Pacific, the Seabees astounded everyone by their ability to do the impossible. With the simple motto, "Can do," they competed to complete their tasks in record times. In an amazing 8 days, they converted the mangrove swamps of Dutch New Guinea into an operating airfield. Time and again, the Seabees, whose name derives from the initials for construction battalion, went about their tasks undaunted by the battles raging around them. Their eagerness to get on with the job even before an area was secure prompted Marines to suggest a more likely meaning for the initials CB. Crazy bastards. With their construction tasks completed, the Seabees willingly pitched in wherever needed. On Okinawa, when rough terrain hampered efforts to supply forward units with much-needed ammunition, the Seabees carried the ammo on their backs. Many were killed and wounded, but the ammo got through. Now, with the planning for the invasion of Japan going forward, the Seabees are busy turning Okinawa into a staging area for the campaign. Beside the necessary airfields, the Seabees are building living quarters for some 750,000 men, surveying sites for the enormous supply dumps, and turning Naha in southern Okinawa into a deep-water port. Without the Seabees' efficient construction of forward bases, combat units at the front would have been without crucial air support. Without their ability to build ports for naval vessels, the steady flow of supplies over the vast distances involved would have been impossible. So convinced was the Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, of the Seabees' crucial role in America's success, he said, "The Seabees have carried the war in the Pacific on their backs." This high praise is not unfounded. By sweat of brow, strength of back, steadfastness of spirit, the Seabees have done whatever was necessary to keep the drive toward Japan rolling forward unabated. With this war winding down, it is time to consider the heroes of the battle against tyranny. In a sense, all the men and women who contributed to the defeat of the Nazis in Europe and who are contributing to the defeat of the Japanese in the Pacific are heroes. The farmers in the field, the riveters on the line, and the kids rounding up scrap metal for the smelters have all sacrificed for the common good, giving of themselves above and beyond the call of duty. But in battle, there is a different sort of heroism, because in battle there is not just personal inconvenience to overcome, but also the possibility of death and dismemberment, of total sacrifice. To become a hero in battle, it is necessary to put the communal cause ahead of the individual's most basic instinct. survival. As the war ends, hundreds of thousands of Americans are returning home as decorated veterans, the ribbons on their chests barely hinting at their accomplishments. They are, almost literally, the kids next door, torn from peacetime normalcy to fight a war not of their own making. Almost to a man, they have risen to the occasion, fighting not for the glory, but for the good, asking little in return but the chance, eventually, to return home and resume their previous lives. As time passes, their tales will be told. Grandchildren at fireside will hear how they charged into enemy fire, fought without rest for weeks or even months at a stretch, and reached out with a hand of kindness to a continent in ruins. In a war this vast, extraordinary heroism becomes almost a common thing. But among those many veterans, there will be a few, a bare handful really, who return wearing the nation's highest commendation, the Congressional Medal of Honor. The recipients of that award are anything but common. Men whose bravery and selflessness in battle are so great that they demand to be recognized not just by units or branches or states, but by the nation as a whole. In 1862, Congress authorized the casting of a medal to be given to non-commissioned officers and privates as shall most distinguish themselves by their gallantry in action during the present insurrection. A year later, officers were made eligible for the decoration, which is awarded based on 8 criteria: setting a personal example under fire that inspires other men, devotion to duty under fire, accepting danger, saving life, overcoming one's injuries, defeating great odds, taking command, and seizing the opportunity to strike a blow at the enemy. So that the medal will not be denigrated by petty second-guessing, the records upon which the decisions are made are destroyed, but a few things about the awards process are known. Traditionally, it is necessary that a recipient's heroic acts be witnessed by 3 or more people. Statements by those witnesses are reviewed at the division level, and if the actions described seem distinctly and undeniably heroic, the information is then bumped up the chain of command. At every level, Corps, Army, theater, details of the events in question are analyzed, a process designed to preserve the sanctity of the Medal of Honor. Finally, with the facts of a case known and put in perspective, a decision is rendered and a recommendation is made to Congress. It has been said that some men are born great, that some achieve greatness, and that others have it thrust upon them. In this war, the winners of the Congressional Medal of Honor would seem to be all 3. They have been thrust into impossible situations, and in those situations they achieve that which must have been born into them: the ability to recognize what needs to be done and to carry through without allowing the noise of basic survival instincts to break their concentration. It is for that they are recognized heroes among heroes, at long last, marching toward home. 6 August 1945, Tinian. In the end, what the war in the Pacific has come down to is a single weapon that has forever changed the world. That weapon's journey began in the desert of the southwest United States, where Robert Oppenheimer and his band of scientists have labored round the clock on what is codenamed the Manhattan Project. Consider General Douglas MacArthur, architect of island hopping, moving inexorably across the Pacific Ocean. Target? Japan. For 2 years, MacArthur, his armies and his navies have followed now familiar patterns in regaining lost ground. Aerial bombardment, naval bombardment, amphibious landing, infantry advance, conversion of key military assets, primarily airstrips, for Allied use. When one island is conquered, it is used as a jumping-off point for the next, and the cycle begins again. In addition, consider Harry Truman. A former haberdasher from Missouri, Truman was drafted into the vice presidency as a political expediency by Franklin Roosevelt, the most popular and influential president of the 20th century. In the waning days of the most destructive war in human history, Roosevelt dies, and Truman becomes the most powerful man in the world. Truman believes that Oppenheimer's bomb, used correctly, might convince the Japanese to surrender, making a bloody invasion of Japan unnecessary. On this August day, barely a year after Marines under MacArthur's command took the island, a lone B-29 taxis onto the runway at Tinian. On Truman's orders, the B-29 carries Oppenheimer's bomb, codenamed Little Boy. Little Boy weighs 4.5 tons and should, theoretically, produce an explosion the equivalent of 20,000 tons of high explosive. The target for Little Boy is Hiroshima, a Japanese city chosen largely because it has been little touched by the war. The destruction wrought by the bomb will, Truman thinks, make a greater impression on the military cadre that controls Japan if it is not camouflaged by previous damage. The Japanese, unimpressed by a single B-29 passing over Hiroshima, do not even bother to sound an air raid siren. At 8:15 in the morning, with a blinding flash, the first atom bomb detonated in war explodes over the central city. The aircrew, banking back toward Tinian, sees behind it a mushroom cloud rising 10,000 feet up. "What have we done?" mutters one crewman. A hospital directly below the explosion is instantly vaporized, and for more than a mile around, the destruction is nearly total. 78,000 people die in just a few minutes, and thousands more are so irradiated that their long-term health prospects are doubtful. Word of the weapon's success is radioed back to base and relayed from there through the chain of command to President Truman, waiting nervously aboard the presidential yacht Augusta. Though the loss of life is lower than conventional bombs have caused previously in Tokyo and Dresden, the Japanese denounce the attack as barbaric and inhuman. Truman threatens further use of the bomb, but the Japanese leadership, deciding that what they were seeing could not be believed, chooses to ignore him. Truman's threat is, in fact, largely a bluff. Only one more atomic bomb is ready to be dropped, this one a plutonium-based weapon, vastly more sophisticated than the Hiroshima bomb. On 9 August, a B-29 carrying the second bomb, codenamed Fat Man, flies over the port city of Nagasaki. The B-29 is named Box Car, and at the controls is Major Charles Sweeney. In a matter of seconds, the industrial district where 90% of Nagasaki's workforce labors is in ruins. "35,000 Japanese die on the spot, and over the next several months, as many more will die of radiation sickness." Boxcar, mission complete, is forced to land at Okinawa. MacArthur's most recent acquisition, a safe landing site won with American blood only 2 weeks earlier. Truman again demands the Japanese surrender. Whether the arrogant militarists who hold the reins of command in Japan will listen, Truman doesn't know. What he does know, however, is whatever they do, he has no more atom bombs. August 1945, Tokyo. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while horrific, are not the only problems facing Japan's Supreme Council for the direction of the war. Since May, the commanders of the mighty Japanese imperial war machine have been despondent. They know that, in strategic terms, Japan has shot her last bolt. The Japanese economy is in shambles. Most of her imported sources of food and raw materials have been cut off. Many of her people face starvation. Japan's proud military is also in a shambles, with the Navy in particular reduced to a mere shadow of itself. When the Germans surrendered in Europe last May, that freed the Americans to intensify their fighting in the Pacific. Since then, American victories have included the capture of Okinawa, a nearby island that is a prime site for launching bomber attacks against Japanese cities. And now the Soviets are adding to Japanese woes. The Soviets had signed a non-aggression pact with Japan, and Japanese leaders had secretly hoped that the Soviets would help them negotiate a face-saving surrender. During Potsdam, top Japanese political leaders put out feelers via Stalin to the Americans seeking peace. They wanted to avoid an Allied invasion of Japan. But Japan's fanatic generals, of course, were firmly against it. They said Japan could repulse any American invasion. Japanese army units could be concentrated at the American landing sites. Japanese Air Force planes in waves of kamikaze assaults could strafe the American transports and their troops. And if the American troops moved further inland, they'd encounter volunteer reserve forces who'd fight them. This ludicrous assessment of Japan's ability to stave off a stronger, better-equipped American invasion reflects how obsessed the generals are with military honor. They talk about a general decisive battle that adheres to a vigorous spirit of attack to set the example for 100 million compatriots. So, perhaps against the wiser judgment of the political leaders, Japan listed the following conditions for peace: no military occupation of Japan, the right to try their war criminals themselves, and the right to disarm their own troops rather than surrender directly to the Allies. The final point is a face-saving offer from the generals. Maybe the Japanese public will think that Japanese forces hadn't been defeated, but had merely laid down their arms voluntarily. U.S. Secretary of State James Burns firmly rejects those conditions, saying only unconditional surrender was acceptable. Burns added that this meant the Emperor would be subject to the Supreme Commander of the Allied powers. That is too much for the Japanese in early summer. They fear the Emperor being deposed and the elimination of Japan's chrysanthemum throne. The Japanese generals know their soldiers will never surrender if it means the loss of their Emperor. So they fight on. But now, in August, their old friends, the Soviets, have declared war on Japan. Old Stalin has his eye on gaining the southern half of Sakhalin Island, as well as the Kuril Islands and the old Russian bases of Port Arthur and Dairen in South Manchuria. So 80 Soviet divisions race across the Gobi Desert and over mountainous terrain to push the Japanese out of China. The Soviets are far superior in men, equipment, and experience to the Japanese Kwantung Army in Manchuria, which has only 24 poorly equipped divisions to face them. Many of the Kwantung soldiers are aging or unfit. They have almost no fighting experience. Their equipment is obsolete. The first-rate Japanese troops and equipment headed to the Pacific Front long ago. The Kwantung soldiers are, by and large, overrun by the Soviets, with thousands of Japanese captured as prisoners. Only occasionally does a Japanese unit offer up resistance. The mounting losses in China are then joined by the devastation of the 2 atomic bombs. Back in Tokyo, the Emperor calls his Supreme Council for the direction of the war back to his bomb-proof bunker. The council members argue over what the Americans' term of unconditional surrender, subject to, might mean for the Emperor. It falls to the Emperor himself to make a decision, and Hirohito calls for the immediate acceptance of the Allied demand. He tells his stunned and saddened council that it should bow to my wishes and accept. The next day, on 15 August, Hirohito's high voice of the crane goes out to his 100 million loyal subjects for the first time in their lives via a noon radio broadcast. Despite the best that has been done by everyone, the war situation developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, while the general trends of the world have all turned against her interest. Moreover, the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. The Emperor told his subjects that he was aware of their innermost feelings about surrendering, and aware it would subject them to new and great hardship and suffering. However, says Hirohito, we have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace for all generations to come by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. Several army leaders commit suicide rather than hear the Emperor agree to surrender, and assassins make attempts on some of the political leaders. But most Japanese accept the will of their Emperor. It is the only real choice they have. For months, the various allies in Europe have been positioning themselves for the post-war world. Much of the pecking order of that world will be decided in the next few months. And if the Russians' primary concern is grabbing and holding as much land as possible, the Americans are proving their endgame mettle in the quest to capture and domesticate Germany's highly successful rocket program. Though Hitler at first doubted that missiles could play a significant role in war, a successful launch of an experimental A-4 rocket in 1942 convinced Der Fuhrer otherwise. Rocket research became the highest Nazi priority. More than 2,000 scientists worked developing rockets at Peenemünde, Germany's main missile research facility on the Baltic Sea. The result of this massive effort was the V-2, a 46-foot liquid fuel rocket that carried a ton of high explosives at speeds exceeding 3,000 miles an hour. It was, without a question, the greatest technological achievement of the war. Though lacking a guidance system that would make the V-2 an accurate weapon aimed at London and later Antwerp, the V-2 was stunningly effective. The Nazis fired more than 1,000 V-2s at London, killing almost 3,000 civilians and injuring thousands more. And even as the Allies endured that onslaught, they also saw in it rocketry's almost unlimited military possibilities. After the invasion of Normandy, the American High Command sought to capture German missile launchers, not just to prevent further attacks on Allied cities, but also to secure hardware that could be shipped home for further study. Even before the end of the war, Americans working at White Sands under Robert Goddard dissected, reassembled, and launched dozens of German missiles. Some of the tests were successful, others were not. But the knowledge garnered from the captured missiles helped convince the American leadership that the Nazi V-2s could form the backbone of a futuristic post-war fighting force. In early May 1945, the American High Command instituted Operation Overcast, an attempt to capture the German missile program as an ongoing enterprise and transport it in toto back to the United States. Working behind Russian and even British lines, the Americans smuggled out truckloads of research documentation stashed by Germans in caves and abandoned mines. An underground rocket factory in territory to be turned over to the Soviets is looted by American troops. More than 100 V-2s are trucked from the scene over Soviet protests. Most importantly, American troops round up and smuggle West German rocket scientists, bagging the biggest catch of all in the southern German town of Oberammergau, Werner von Braun. The visionary genius who headed the Nazi rocket program prefers to surrender to Americans, convinced that the Russians offer little more than torture and death. The United States, on the other hand, had outfitted White Sands with a full range of scientific facilities and is welcoming its so-called prisoners of peace with open arms. In the weeks following von Braun's surrender, more than 300 German scientists cross into American-held territory, reassembling the German research laboratory the Allies worked so hard to dismantle. Though the fruits of the Nazi rocketeers' labors are visible in the destroyed apartment blocks and cratered streets of London, the scientists themselves, in the isolation of the New Mexico desert, will be reunited with their life's work, and the development they started in the name of Nazism will continue undisturbed. Although the war is not yet over, the end is clearly in sight, and on the home front, people look forward to returning to a normal life. But a normal life in 1945 will hardly resemble the life of an average American when the war began. The United States has undergone irrevocable changes over the course of the war, and life at home will never be the same. America has gone from a relatively minor player on the world scene to the most powerful country on earth. As Europeans and Asians face the years of healing and reconstruction ahead of them in the aftermath of this cataclysmic war, Americans are faced with a different problem. Before them lies the responsibility and vast uncertainties of world leadership. They must convert the most productive wartime economy in history into a viable domestic economy, providing the basic materials for rebuilding the world, with all Americans being incorporated into the society in an equitable manner. As the arsenal of democracy, American factories have fueled the Allied war effort around the globe. Under FDR's leadership, the nation's productivity exploded, with tanks, planes, ships, and guns pouring off assembly lines in numbers thought impossible before the war. At war's end, the United States is the only industrial giant whose production base remains intact. The role American women played in the Allied victory cannot be overstated. They readily accepted the challenge of going from domestic housewives to being welders, riveters, and assembly line workers. The enormous surplus of men and equipment created by victory in Europe is beginning to have its effects back home. Factories previously dedicated to the production of tanks are now retooling to manufacture automobiles. Instead of bombers, passenger planes are rolling off assembly lines. While some women happily return to a life of domesticity, many, after doing their part to win the war, have found fulfillment in their new role outside the home. Men, lucky enough to be on the first ships returning home, find themselves competing for jobs with women who, when they left for the war, were relegated to the kitchen. The same can be said for African Americans. The indisputable record of black units in this war stands as proof of the ability, patriotism, and intelligence of the black airmen, soldiers, and sailors. The sacrifices these men have made, the dedication they have shown, demand an equal measure of gratitude and respect. Upon returning home, the black man in America will likely no longer settle for second-class citizenship. As in 1941, Americans again face a future of vast uncertainty. Their problems are real, and there are no easy answers. But if they maintain the spirit and determination exhibited over the past 5 years, Americans may hold in their hands the key to a glorious and seemingly boundless future.